The tragic mid-air collision in Washington, D.C. this past week was utterly horrific for all of us to observe and try to keep up with the news. So many souls were lost, so many bodies pulled out of the Potomac. And I want to first offer both prayers and support for those who are involved in the industries, those who lost their lives, and for their families. I think that's the most important thing that all of us can do. The second thing that I'd like to do is clarify a secondary tragedy, and that secondary tragedy is that the family of one of the pilots has asked that her name not be released. And they've asked this ostensibly because of the vitriolic statements that were made literally as bodies were still being pulled out of the Potomac River, which was that in some way diversity was to blame for this horrible tragedy. This tragedy that we're experiencing as a nation, truly. And I wanted to address that for a couple of different reasons. The first is I don't think that a lot of us are aware of some of the specifics of Army aviation, and we're certainly not necessarily aware of some of the studies that go into aviation safety, which is a huge, huge industry. It's one of the most regulated industries, as you can imagine, in the world for all of our safeties. So let's start out with understanding a little bit about a Blackhawk helicopter. I didn't fly the Blackhawk, I flew the Apache, but both of them are considered complex helicopters. They both are two-engine helicopters. They both have to have two pilots at the controls. So both have to be rated aviators. Both are fully proficient and qualified. In this case, there was a pilot in command, a male pilot, who was administering a check ride to the female pilot. And that female pilot is considered then the co-pilot in that particular configuration. Now, the pilot in command is responsible for the safety of the aircraft. But at the end of the day, a complex aircraft has two pilots for the reason that both pilots are responsible for that aircraft. So let's start out with understanding that there were two pilots in charge of this aircraft, and in fact, the most senior and the most experienced, in this case, happened to be a male. But again, there's no implication in this because we don't know what happened in this crash, but we do know that we had two pilots of two different genders. That's all we know, both of them who were highly proficient aviation professionals. The second thing is to address the specifics of the many, many studies that have gone into aviation safety regarding genders of pilots over dozens and dozens of years. And I wanted to bring up just a couple of them because I think it's relevant for us to discuss facts and not to discuss things that maybe are a little bit more inflammatory or maybe said too hastily and without consideration for either the people involved or for the facts at hand. The first study that I wanted to share with you is a study that was done in 2013. And this was done by a person attending the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, looking at women in the combat arms in the global war on terror. This was a 2013 study published by Army Major Seneca Peña Colazzo. And this study found that female Army helicopter pilots had fewer accidents, in fact, than their male counterparts. It found that women who made up 10% of Army helicopter pilots were involved in 3% of the accidents. So, interesting data point there, very specific to Army aviation. Now let's go back into general aviation. Now, for decades, we've known in general aviation that women are exceptional pilots. And in fact, this 1986 study from Applied Ergonomics uses data from the National Transportation and Safety Board, again relating to general aviation, found in this case that male pilots were 60% more likely to have an accident than female pilots. And additionally, male pilots were twice as likely to be involved in fatal accidents. Let's look at another paper, and this is a 2011 paper, and this is the one that I'm going to leave you with because I think this is really what gets down to the meat of it, which is essentially that by examining accidents by the pilot's gender and controlling for the levels of experience that every pilot had, it found no statistically significant difference in the likelihood that errors by male or female pilots would lead to a crash. The study concluded that there was, quote, no evidence, unquote, to support the notion that accidents caused by pilot error could be tied to the pilot's gender. That's from Accident Analysis and Prevention. So I'd like us all to deal with facts. Let's quote the facts. Let's not make inflammatory statements or even consider that those might be true. Don't allow the inflammatory statements that you're hearing in the news to impact what the reality is. Go to the evidence, go to the facts. And at the end of the day, let's honor every single one of these professionals and their families who are involved in this tragedy. Thanks.